And through a series of effects called the channel strip, you can take a snare, sound like that, and make it sound like this. So here's something fun that you can't do with acoustic drums, because acoustic drums are the sound that they are. However, in my opinion, I find that acoustic drums are the funnest to play as a drummer. A lot of people are like, why don't you play acoustic drums? Or why do you play that electronic drum set? Why don't you play some real drums, dude? Yep, I do play real drums, and I started off playing real drums before electronic drums were a thing. I mean, there was electronic drums, but man, they were archaic. It was really challenging to be able to play some of these fast, articulate patterns. Still to this day, I want everybody to know that when I play this snare drum, even on a kit that is supposed to sound acoustic, there is a little tinge of quote-unquote MIDI sound because it's not the real thing. I'm hitting a piece of technology that is then triggering a pre-recorded sample, and it's trying to play it back as best as technology is capable of. Now, Roland and other gear companies out there have done so far the best they possibly can do on a consumer level to create a replicated sound of a real drum. However, a real drum pretty much has an infinite amount of velocities. This electronic drum is one of the best ones on one of the best trigger units. This is the snare drum, the 140 KT 140 or something like that. This is super freaking badass. You can do a rem click. It's got a rem shot. Hits on the edge of the rim, and then there is, I think, 7 to 10 samples in there. It's not really the round robin approach. Round robin is you have a variety of samples that it's round robining, meaning cycling through at any given velocity. I think it's a maximum of 10 or something like that. Now, on a real drum, it's potentially an infinite amount. That's what's so cool about acoustic drums. Now, these are real drums. An electronic drum is, in fact, a real drum because it is made to be a drum. And an acoustic drum is made to be a drum, so they are both, in fact, real drums. Now, what an acoustic drum is no electronics in it. It's purely acoustic sound. And there's a ton of different acoustic drums. There's drum set parts. There's tom-toms, kick drums, bass drums. And then there's congas, bongos, oshiko drums, you name it. There's tablas, all kinds of acoustic drums that is basically a piece of wood or a piece of steel or a piece of plastic that is probably round, and it has some sort of head on it made from some sort of material, and that creates an acoustic sound. And there's maybe tambourines in it. There's all kinds of stuff. There's so many different drums. There's hundreds of different types of acoustic drums. And now the other type of drum is an electronic drum, and it is in fact a drum made to be hit and made to make sound. However, it doesn't necessarily produce an acoustic sound that you want to record. It has electronic sound, and it has to be connected to a computer or usually a drum module that houses all the drum sounds for it to then play. For the most part, a lot of drum manufacturers are trying to mimic acoustic drum sounds. This one right here in particular, this sound, it's not necessarily mimicking an acoustic sound. it is an acoustic sound. It's an acoustic drum, snare drum, that has been recorded and put inside this device, and years and years and years of development and technology. What is the goal? It's trying to emulate an acoustic drum. So what I use it for is not for an acoustic sound. I use it to enhance my drumming. That's the thing. So people are like, why don't you just play acoustic drums if you're going to play an E drum set that has acoustic sounds on it? You know what? That's a really freaking good question. That's why I personally don't like to play a whole lot of regular drum sounds, acoustic drum sounds, on my electronic kit. I like to play electronic drum sounds for electronic music. If I was in a country band and if I had an electronic drum set, I would probably try to emulate a country drum sound, which is an acoustic drum sound. There's nothing wrong with that. When an electronic drum set emulates an acoustic drum sound, there's all kinds of different awesome purposes and goals for that. One, sound level. You can lower the sound level a ton, because acoustic drums, let's face it, they're freaking loud. And if you want to only hear the mic'd up recorded version of the acoustic drums, you have to be playing it really loud to drown out, to be louder than the acoustic drums. So that's one issue that I have with acoustic drums. It's never going to go away, is that they're so freaking loud. A lot of times the cymbals do not match the level of the drums. So now you have this unmixed sound, which is sometimes ear piercing and annoying. And if the drum set, the acoustic drum set, is not in the right room, an acoustic drum set can sound freaking awful. No matter how great the drums are, and no matter how great the player is. Now I'm talking about purely like mixing ears, producing ears. I'm talking about a set of ears that is in, now I'm wearing the producer hat, and you just listen to that drummer play the drums and you're like, man, the drums sound like they're harsh. They're loud. They have obnoxious frequencies, but that's the beauty of producing. So when you record that drum set, that beautiful drum set, maybe with a freaking stellar player who's playing a sick freaking beat, you then lower the cymbal volume and you start adding some compression. You cut out some of the unnecessary EQ frequency areas in a lot of these drums, and now it's starting to sound like the drums on the radio, the drums on your favorite record or something like that. So that's a really big thing with acoustic drums, and that's what engineers try to do with bands. You see a band on stage, they're running those drums through microphones and through all kinds of processing to get the drums to sound freaking good and not clash with the vocals, not clash with the bass guitar, with the keyboards and everything like that. Maybe they got tracks playing, and now you have to blend acoustic drums and a drummer who's not perfect with a perfectly quantized track. That's a whole nother thing in itself. I deal with all of these problem areas all the time, and I consider them fun projects. Really fun to try to create a really loud, obnoxious drum sound and turn it into a freaking awesome radio sounding drum set. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. But anyways, what I like to do is turn this acoustic sound, emulated sound, and I like to turn it into that snare drum is an acoustic snare that I recorded, no different than this snare, no different than that snare. That's a recorded acoustic snare. Oops. That is an old jazz recording from the Winston Brothers called the Amen Break. And that is the most recognized recorded drum beat ever. It's called the Amen Break. There's multiple versions of the Amen Break. It's an old jazz recording by this freaking sick jazz player. I'm not sure how much he knew how famous his beat really was before he passed away. Man, did he get royalties from that? No. Is it possible for him to get royalties from that? Not necessarily the way music publishing and the way payouts are created over time. But anyways, this snare drum is just a heavily processed snare. This snare drum is a little less processed. Now this snare drum, it sounds a lot more acoustic. It still has a ton of freaking processing on it. It's got multiple layers of compression, multiple instances of EQ, probably some gating, a bunch of microphones, like the overhead microphone, a little bit of the bass drum microphone, some of the toms maybe. It's not just one microphone that you're hearing. It's a whole drum set sound, creating this nice acoustic drum sound. Now, this sound is a sound that has been continually produced to give it this much wilder sound. It's very compressed. It has a thicker transient on it. So this one has quite the transient. It's very spiky. Transient meaning the highest peak, the tick, the high end. This is what's going to hit you in the chest, and this is also what's going to kind of like slap you across the face. This is the transient, the highest peak. Now, that's a very thin transient. This one is a thicker transient. And this is the classic sound of a snare drum that the transient has been thickened by a transient designer, which is basically a combination of compression, EQ. So this one has transient designer, it has a couple different compressors, and it has an EQ. And it has some reverb on it. And it sounds like this when I play. Like that. So there's 3 different drum sounds right there. Every single one of those drum kits is a recorded acoustic drum sound. Again, for all of you purists out there who are like, those are electronic drums or blah, 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 they're recorded acoustic drums. And they've been heavily processed to create a different sound. Just like a bass guitar, you can turn a bass guitar into the nastiest Skrillex bass just with a series of plugins and processing. That's what electronic music is heavily processed, usually organic sounds, organic recordings, or some sort of synthesis, which is a sine wave, just a basic and then you start tweaking it to get it to growl with distortions, with filters, compression, with reverb, flanger. These are all different awesome fun effects, and you start putting these effects, and as a producer you start to get to know your effects chains. You start to get to know your channel strips, and through a series of effects called the channel strip, you can take a snare, sound like that, and make it sound like this.